Hello and welcome to Esther's Gardening Adventures. I'm Esther and I am starting to prep for my winter sowing. I'm going to put a couple jugs together today, and I thought I'd talk with you about problem solving some of the issues that can arise with winter sowing. If this is your first time hearing about winter sowing, it's a way of growing seedlings, starting seeds outdoors in things like milk jugs instead of indoors under grow lights. And I have a whole series, Winter Sowing 101, beginner guide, to walk you through everything you need to know about winter sowing. But sometimes certain problems arise or certain things happen and you wonder, well, I wonder what caused that. So I thought today I'd go through and help you troubleshoot some of the things that might happen. And if it's your first time winter sowing, this could be helpful because it'll help you avoid making the mistakes. And if you've encountered some of these mistakes or had some of these problems, maybe it'll help you know the problem and know how to fix it. If there is a solution, like something you can do now, I'll let you know as well. And today I'm going to be winter sowing some lettuce. So one of the problems that can arise with winter sowing, and I'm just going to talk to you as I'm working, and hopefully I can do both at the same time. One of the most common problems I hear from people about winter sowing is that their seeds didn't sprout. And the first tip I'll tell you is just to be patient. Really, with winter sowing, the seedlings can take a long time to sprout, and Mother Nature will decide when they sprout. A lot of my summer crops don't sprout until late March, even if I put them out in jugs in February. So the point is my first tip is, if your seeds haven't sprouted, if your jugs don't have any sprouts, my first tip is just wait a little longer. Even if, let's say, all of the lettuce crops, except for one, haven't sprouted, some varieties take a little longer than others, even within the same type of category. Just give it a little time. Okay, but let's say that somehow something happened that made the seeds not sprout. Well, the second possible reason that they may not have sprouted is you may not have kept your soil moist enough, or you may not have started off with moist enough soil. Here I have some pre-moistened potting mix that I definitely made more moist than it's supposed to be. I mean, it's dripping wet. But honestly, it's better to have a too wet soil than to have a too dry soil, because seeds, in order to sprout, need moist conditions. And if it's dry soil, not only will they not germinate, but they won't have anything. Water serves as the way of carrying the nutrients up into the plant and allowing the photosynthesis and all of that to work. So if they don't have any water to feed them and to get their nutrients by, they're just not going to do well. So first thing is, did you pre-moisten your potting mix enough? And did you make sure that the jugs stayed wet and moist? Now, let's say that you didn't moisten enough, or your jugs are a little too dry. Well, you can take something like this or a shallow tray and just put the jugs in the shallow tray of water for 15-20 minutes and let them just absorb through the bottom, and that'll help moisten the soil. Another reason your seeds may not have sprouted could be that the seeds are just not viable. And there's two reasons they may not be viable. One, they may be older seeds. This winter I was thinking, and it occurred to me that I wonder if one of the reasons why new gardeners, and especially people who are starting growing from seed for the first time, they've bought all their plants in the past. I wonder if one of the reasons they have such beginner success is partly because maybe they bought new seeds and were starting with fresh seeds, and why after the first year they didn't necessarily do as well. Almost all varieties will last 2 to 3 years. There is an exception, and some, like beans and tomatoes, are 4+ years, and I think some brassicas are like 10 years. Don't quote me on that last one. But there are some crops that the seeds don't germinate or will stop germinating after a certain number of years. One of those is onions. If you're growing onions from seed, their seeds are really only good for 1 year, maybe 2 at best. Peppers are good for around 2 years. The seeds can last longer than that. Also for flowers, asters, I have found the seeds only really are good for 1 year. Anything in the allium family, leeks, anything like that, that's only going to be 1 year. So you're going to want to buy fresh seeds. One solution is, if you're using older seeds that are, the label, the packet says 2022 or older, is to add more seeds, right? Now, if it's something like an onion, adding more seeds isn't going to fix it because none of the seeds will sprout. But if the germination rate is just decreased a little, then adding more seeds to the container will ultimately increase your chances of at least a few of the seeds sprouting. It also increases the chances that they all germinate, and then you have a lot of seedlings to transplant. But I'd rather have too many than not enough. Another option is if you have enough seeds to spare, and if you only have a few seeds to sow, you don't want to do this. But if you have enough seeds to spare, you can do a germination test ahead of putting it out. And you can even grow some of those seedlings inside if you don't want to throw out the seeds. But what you do is you take a paper towel and you put 10 seeds or less, depending on how many you can spare, in the paper towel. You moisten the paper towel first, and then you put it in a plastic baggie like I had. Make sure you label it. And then you put it somewhere warm. And after 3 or 4 days, for some, and up to 2 to 3 weeks for others, you can see if they've sprouted. So if only, let's say, 6 out of 10 seeds sprout, you might want to plant more seeds. Another reason seeds might fail, or seeds may not be viable, is if they were seeds you saved from your garden, or that you got from somebody who saved it from their garden. There's the possibility that they didn't save the seeds right. You know, seeds are only viable if the plant is at the right maturation stage. For beans, that means the pods need to have dried out. I did a whole video on seed saving for flowers and for vegetables. So look up that video if you want to understand, if you want to know whether you saved your seeds properly. But if you didn't save your seeds at the right time, then they're not going to germinate. They're not going to be ready to produce other little plants. So that's another possibility. One reason that your seeds may not sprout can be simply that you forgot to put them in the jug. I can't tell you how many times I was starting to tape up a jug and then I realized that the seed packet hadn't even been opened. So making sure that you planted the seeds in the jug. And I know that every year there's at least 1 or 2 jugs I just didn't put seeds in. I forgot that step. I got distracted talking to somebody or something happened like that, right? If the cause is that you forgot to put the seeds in, the only solution is, 1, open up the jug and add more seeds, or start another jug, which is also an option in general, as if the jug you've started didn't sprout yet. You can start another jug. If you're pretty confident, you know, if you have newer seeds or if you think you didn't put seeds in, you can start another jug. And the other reason your seeds may not have sprouted may be how deep you planted your seeds at. For seeds that are tiny, I've got these yarrow seeds here. I'll show you how small they are. They're tiny, tiny seeds. Like if a packet says surface sow, or if it said needs light to germinate, well then in that case, you're going to want to sprinkle the seeds just on the surface. And then you get them to adhere to the soil by spraying them with a water bottle at a light mist. And that will make them have some surface contact with the soil. And you don't need to put anything on top of them. You can just close it up and let nature do its thing. If the seed is smaller but not tiny, let's say like these Chinese cabbage seeds, well then I just drop them on the surface in little, in the spots I want them to be. And then I might put a tiny layer of potting mix on top of where they were, or across the whole thing, and kind of push it down gently. Now if they're a bigger seed, so you don't need to go very deep with any seeds really. If they're a bigger seed, like let's say a pumpkin seed or a flower seed that's really long, what I do is I'll take the seed and I will push it down into the jug till it's just kind of past the surface level. And then I'll cover it over. I may put another layer on top, but you don't really need to make it very deep. One of the reasons you don't want to plant the seeds too deep is every seed has a certain amount of energy stored in it. So if you plant the seed too deep, it will run out of energy before it reaches the surface. Now, quite honestly, with 3 inches of potting mix, I think a seed would probably still survive. I think it's more if it's like a tiny flower seed or perennial that you haven't, that you covered it up when it needed sun. But that could be a reason, improper depth. And don't panic too much about it. Another common problem I hear with winter sowing, a complaint I hear from people or question I hear from people, is that their seedlings don't look healthy or are struggling. Similar to my caveat for seed starting, to be a little patient, I have the same initial advice for anyone who's like, my seedlings are tiny. When seeds sprout in winter sowing jugs, a lot of times you'll see the sprouts and then they'll kind of just stay the same size and you think, oh no, they're not doing well. Well, the truth is most of the time they're actually building up a root system underneath that seedling, and they're kind of staying above the surface to get enough light, and they won't really start growing. There's some, like squash and melons, will grow fast, but some seedlings will just stay tiny until very close to when, like a couple weeks before you're going to transplant them. So first thing I say is if your seedlings are tiny and not growing fast, don't compare them to what you get from the store. They're not being grown under grow lights. Oh, but that means they might grow a little slower. So that's my first step, is if your seedlings are not doing great, but they look healthy, they're green, They are not wilting. They're not burned. They're not weird colors like yellowing or kind of bleached look. Then just give them time. That's my first advice. But if your seedlings are yellowing or kind of wilting, well, wilting and sort of looking kind of faded, the first sign is that they need water. So double check. If you lift a well-watered jug, it's quite heavy. It's probably like 2 pounds. An empty jug, a jug that doesn't have any water in it, the soil's depleted, is very light. So if your jug is super light, you need to water it. If the plant is looking wilty, chances are it needs watering. Now, if it's looking yellowed, if it's looking like it's not doing well, there's a couple of things to think about. Did you use potting mix or potting soil? Did you use seed starting mix? Now, it's a big no-no in winter sowing to use seed starting mix. And the reason for that is, let's see, what am I going to sow first? I think the Pablo lettuce. This was a lettuce I grew last year. And it was my best performing lettuce. So I'm definitely going to regrow it this year. So we're going to make Pablo lettuce. Oh, this paint pen needs some regeneration. The first thing is, oh no, don't get wet. The first thing I'll say is, did you use seed starting mix? Seed starting mix is basically a growing medium without any nutrients in it. It's the fluff and moisture control that allows seeds to sprout. And it's perfect for starting seeds indoors because you're going to transplant those seedlings into bigger containers with potting mix and potting soil after they get going. But when you're winter sowing, you're planting the seeds and whatever, you're giving them everything they will need until you transplant them into the garden. They're going to have all the nutrients they need. They need that in that container. And that's why you don't use seed starting mix. That's why you have to use potting mix or potting soil. And ideally, higher quality ones. I have found the cheap ones by some of the bigger names. I'm not going to say them out there. That you can get at your big box stores, they just don't have the nutrients, and the soil is often quite dead. When you go to add water to it, it won't absorb the water without you stirring it around or using hot water or warm water, and to me that's a sign that it's not going to be healthy for the plants if it's not alive a little bit. So if you have used lower quality potting mix or use seed starting mix, you do have a solution. You do have an option, and that option is similar to the bottom watering advice I gave for if your plants don't have enough water. That is to take a container and buy some, if you don't own some, buy some liquid, organic, preferably fertilizer. And you want to mix that at double diluted. So do half the amount of half the amount of liquid fertilizer to water ratio that it advises, and then stick your jug in there, let it absorb the nutrients, and that should bring your plants back to health. The leaves that got super yellow may not change color, but the new leaves should be green. You may need to use that fertilizer, liquid fertilizer, multiple times, like every 2 weeks until you transplant your seedlings. But that should help make them healthier. It's not ideal, but it is a possible solution. Another reason your seedlings may be struggling is, I'm going to get this jug sown by the end of this video, I swear. Another reason your seedlings may be struggling may be that you have forgotten to watch the nighttime temperatures. You know, winter sowing is not set it and forget it. It is one of those things. See, these are smallish seeds. I'm going to just sprinkle them around. And lettuce can handle crowding better than some other plants. But what I was going to say is, with winter sowing, while it takes a lot less work than indoor seed starting does, it's not set it and forget it. You need to watch your jugs, and you need to watch nighttime temperatures. And if it's forecasted to get near freezing, you need to go out while it's still daylight and check your jugs to see if there's even the tiniest bit of a green shoot in there. Now, if you're growing frost hardy seedlings, they'll probably be okay if you didn't get out there on a freezing night. But generally, I cover any jugs that have sprouted. Now, you don't have to cover them if they haven't sprouted, but if your seedlings have sprouted, if you just put a nice blanket over the top of all the sprouted jugs, and I cover everything because why not? It helps provide extra shelter, but the sprouted jugs are what needs covering. If you cover them with a heavy blanket, that will seal in the warmer temperatures that are inside of the container and will help keep it from getting as cold as it gets for freezing. So you gotta watch nighttime temperatures. Sprinkling some of these now. You got to watch your nighttime temperatures with winter sowing, and you got to cover your jugs at night. And sometimes when they look wilty, or when they look cold, or when they look kind of mushy, that's a sign that they froze. Now, sometimes seedlings will bounce back, and if just a little bit of the leaves got damaged, don't panic. Give it a couple days, maybe even a week, and see if they survive. If they don't kind of bounce back, you might need to sow more seeds. You may have killed them off by not taking care of them in the cold. The third reason you may have had problems with your seedlings maybe struggling is that maybe pests. A lot of people have problems with slugs eating their seedlings, and they say they come up from the bottom, but they don't come from the bottom. I have seen slugs climb in from the top, and they will either eat at the base of the plant or any leaves that are near the edge of the jug. And then they'll get on there and they'll keep eating. So let's pretend this is bridal tool. I don't have any handy at the moment. Well, actually, you know what I kind of do? Hold on. I have these mesh bags that I use sometimes to protect my seedlings. So let's pretend, actually you could probably use this. You would take, you could take bridal tool, or hey, you could even probably use one of these mesh bags, and you would put it over the top of your hole for your jug, and you would put a rubber band over it to hold it in place. Now this will allow the air circulation to happen for your jugs and for it to stay warmer, and it'll allow the rain to come in. However, the rain may also bounce off of it. So definitely, if you're going to be covering your jugs with bridal tool or any kind of thing that keeps the rain from being able to pour directly in instantly, you're going to want to watch the water levels in those jugs. But this can definitely help you. And the other thing you can do is, if you have problems with slugs, is you can elevate your jugs. You can put them on top of a cinder block. You can, in the grass, you can put them on top of a porch or a table. And even just, although the slugs can still find them, just getting them straight out of the direct contact with the soil can help reduce the amount of exposure they have to slugs. So that's one potential solution. Oh, and see, I almost forgot a step because I was talking to you so much. So I'm actually going to put a little more potting mix in here. Okay, and there's a few other problems that can arise with winter sowing that I'm going to help you troubleshoot. Questions to ask yourself that might help you figure out what went wrong or where you went wrong with the seeds, with the seedlings, with the winter sowing process. The first one is, did you do an experiment this time? Did you do something different than last time, or something different than I've recommended or many of the people who are experts in winter sowing have recommended? If you did something different, if you used a container that was an irregular size, that was opaque, you know, the light couldn't get through. If you used, did you remember to put drainage holes in your container? At least once a season, I realized I didn't put drainage holes in the container. I have to go out with scissors and create holes in the container because they'll drown if they can't drain properly. Did you leave the jugs indoors too long after you did your winter sowing? When I do my winter sowing, I never leave my jugs sitting inside in a heated area for more than an hour. I take it out immediately. Now, while it does take a couple of days for seeds to germinate, it can also dry out faster, and it's just good practice because you might forget it. It might be a number of days, and then the seeds have already started germinating, and that's not what you want. You want them outdoors in cold temperatures. Are you keeping your jugs in a sunny spot in the garden? Now, it's okay to have your jugs in part shade, but it's okay if they're in full sun as well. And you don't want your jugs in full shade at any point, because you need the sun to warm the inside of the jugs to create that greenhouse effect. And if the sun isn't able to, all my jugs, I put them in a place they're going to get at least 6 hours of sunlight on them, direct sun on them. So if you have your jugs in a shaded place, that could be why your seedlings are struggling, or why the jugs aren't getting hot enough to help the seeds want to germinate. Did your duct tape come unsealed? When I'm putting duct tape on a container, I will always wipe it off with my hands, the surface of where I'm going to put the tape off with my hands, or if it is damp or my hands are wet, I'll take a towel or a paper towel and I'll wipe it. And then with the duct tape, let's say if you're going to put this tape around a jug that has something like this. I'll just give you an example. See here how it won't come up like that? One thing you can do is you can cut a little slit in the top of the tape, or you can do it with your fingers. And that'll allow it the ability to kind of go in at an angle. If you don't have full adherence, if somehow there's a bubble in it, like that allows moisture to get in there. That allows water to get in and for it to break the seal, and then your jugs won't create as much humidity inside. They will cool off and dry out faster. Most of my failures with winter sowing jugs that aren't related to seeds being too old or forgetting to put the seeds in, most of my failures are because the tape has not sealed properly. 99% of the time, if I look at a jug and nothing has sprouted, if I look around it and I will see that a piece of the tape that I used to seal it. And that's why I don't recommend alternatives to duct tape. Some people have success using things other than duct tape to tape up their jugs. But for my area, I have to use duct tape. I can't just push them together. I can't just use zip ties. They need a full seal here for me. And also make sure you assemble your jugs in a warm place, even in your garage, as long as it's heated. If the plastic is cold, it won't adhere to the duct tape. And so you need to be a dry surface in at least warm conditions. You need it to be at least in the 50s or warmer. All right, I hope this has given you a good idea of some of the things to think about to troubleshoot what went wrong with your jugs if you went wrong. Now, 99% of the time, my jugs do great. I always have a few that don't do well, but don't despair if you have some that don't do well. Think about how much you struggle for starting seeds indoors as well. If you haven't before, there's always some stuff that doesn't go right. So celebrate the successes, and I look forward to hearing all about your journey in your comments. Happy winter sowing.